Well, a new survey reveals shocking new insight into the American public's seemingly warm attitudes toward political violence. The poll from the nonpartisan Public Religion Research Institute found about 3 in 10 Americans believe the 2020 election was stolen from former President Donald Trump, including 2/3 of Republicans and a shocking 82% of those who trust Fox News more than any other media outlet. Among those who trust far-right news, 97% say they believe the election was stolen. This despite the fact that Trump's own cybersecurity and election security officials agreed voting was the safest and most secure ever in the United States. The poll also found almost 2 in 10, 18%, say they agree with the statement that America has gotten so far off track that, quote, true American patriots may have to resort to violence in order to save our country. That includes 30% of Republicans compared to 17% of independents and 11% of Democrats. Those who favor the farthest right media outlets are even more likely to contemplate violence. Among those, 40% agree among those people. Here with us to discuss is Democratic strategist Jennifer Holdsworth-Karp and GOP strategist Malik Abdul. Malik, I'll start with you. You know, some of this is bluster, this talk of, what about a civil war? We'll be ready for civil war. Where there's not a lot of doing anything, which is good. Nothing should be done. There's, a lot of kind of very random, small ball street violence in places like Portland between the left and the right. But, is it a problem that a significant number of conservatives, of right-wing people, I don't actually think they're at considerable danger of starting like a war or taking to the streets with guns, but they do consume a lot of information that is not right. Now, people on the left do as well, but is the right-wing media ecosystem becoming an issue, even for Republicans who want to have healthier conversations or more kind of rational, fact-based, real conversations?
No, I don't think so at all. And in fact, right-wing media, that used to be Fox News. But if you listen to a lot of the right wing out there, Fox News is no longer a home for conservatives, or at least in that right wing. I'm someone, I've appeared on networks, various networks, be it the right-wing networks or even networks like Fox News. And I don't think that the election was stolen. In fact, I just don't think the election wasn't stolen. The election wasn't stolen. And as I go around in these various media outlets, and I get plenty of people to actually agree with me, I think that in this echo chamber, social media for the most part is a cesspool. But it doesn't surprise me that people actually see violence as an answer, as small a number as it is, because I'm one of those who attended the 2017 inauguration of Donald Trump. And that was the first time where I've been in D.C. as long as I have, attending every inauguration since George W. Bush. And I experienced what being threatened by violence feels like. So that was the Antifas who was here. And then, of course, we had the Women's March. The day after Donald Trump was elected, we had students were walking out of school. So none of this actually surprises me. I don't think that those numbers are high, as the polls suggest, on either Republican or Democratic side. But it is something that we need to be mindful of, just how much, our responsibility in media, the things that we choose to foment in media. I think we need to have a more responsible role.
Just to press you on that really quickly, and then we want to get Jennifer's take. I agree. Like, Fox reported correctly about reported the election results, that it was not stolen. Absolutely. But then isn't it a concern if they're losing ground to more extreme right-wing news outlets that are not reporting that? Isn't that reflecting a problem not among the network? Again, I think Fox News reporting was perfectly solid. Was in fact solid. It reflects a problem with the viewers, with the Republican voting base.
Yeah, so I think it's more so a problem of an OAN than even a Newsmax. We just saw that Newsmax cut his ties with Mike Lindell, which they should have, and OAN should as well. But I think we're probably just talking about OAN and not even Newsmax. Newsmax does have a lot of pro-Trump personalities on the network, but they've actually moved away from some of the more provocative coverage that they did right after the election. So we're probably just talking about OAN. And it is a problem there, and I've talked about that openly. They need to move on. The election definitely was not stolen.
And Jennifer, obviously both parties, for a very long time have have protested, have litigated elections, have otherwise contested elections. With January 6th and with the escalation that came from Republicans this time around, have you noticed a reaction among Democrats rethinking, say, are the Democrats who objected, say, to the counting of the Electoral College in 2017, are they kind of embarrassed in hindsight? And do you think you'll see less of that from Democrats, or do you think you'll see more in the argument, well, you got to fight fire with fire?
No, I'm definitely seeing less of it from Democrats. And I just want to go on record. I think, with all due respect to my learned colleague, comparing the Women's March and school walkouts to political violence is disingenuous at best. I don't think that
he had an
we're
Antifa
talking about
too.
I don't think we're talking about protests here. We're talking about what happened on January 6th. And things like that being replicated. No, I am not hearing any talk of that whatsoever in Democratic circles. And when you talk about the Electoral College in 2017, it was something that we fought about with words. There was no storming the Capitol. There was no storming Donald Trump's inauguration. Hell, Hillary Clinton attended Donald Trump's inauguration. We cannot say that about Donald Trump and Joe Biden's inauguration. So I'm really tired of the false equivalence. I'm really tired of the both-siderism. There is absolutely no talk of political violence in mainstream Democratic circles. Yes, I have seen on the correctly named cesspool that is social media, of course I've seen anonymous accounts on the quote unquote left talk about staging some kind of political violence in terms of elections. But no, it is not being given airtime by mainstream officials of the Democratic Party, which is more than I can say for the Republican Party and conservatives in general right now. Fox News is QAnon adjacent.
No,
there's OAN, there's Newsmax, there's a number of people who are pushing the big lie in the Republican Party. And that is what is fueling political violence.
I think there's fringe. I mean, you said not to both sides of this, which is now exactly what I'm about to do. But there are fringe crazy people with varying levels of influence and low influence, but maybe followings on social media and other places. I live in Washington D.C. I used to live until just last month I moved. I lived a block from the Capitol. I was there for the Capitol riot. It was horrible. But in the summer before that, the Antifa came through and smashed every window in town and harassed diners and did all sorts of other things. So, you say it shouldn't be. Those things are not exactly equivalent, but they are pretty bad, and there are plenty of leftist groups creating violence.
There's no question that Antifa is a problem when they go around and smash windows, but they are not a leftist group. They're an anarchist group. They're not part of even the fringe, the most fringe progressive you can find in Congress. We do not give them any airtime. I cannot say the same for the Republican Party.
So a June 2020 survey from the Democracy Fund, a voter study group, found, quote, about 1 in 5 self-described Democrats and Republicans say that violence would be at least a little justified if the other party won the 2020 presidential election. About 1 in 10 of each group says there would be a lot or a great deal of justification for violence if their party lost the 2020 presidential election. That a little too late for that. It's now 2021. I don't know, Malik, do you want to respond to what Jennifer was saying earlier?
Yeah, so the idea that political violence, we just had probably last year, the entire summer going into the fall, the Black Lives Matter riots. Now, that was political violence, and I would actually argue are examples of domestic terrorism. It's unfair to say that Republicans are out there promoting violence because we're not. That there are some Republicans who are out there doing that, of course they are, in the same way that Black Lives Matter is out there protesting violence around all around the country, burning down cities, looting stores. I know members of my own family and business owners who were actually affected by that. That is actually violence. I think for the most part, Americans are against violence overall, and I don't think it's a left or a right thing. I think that what we do in media, we tend to say, oh, well, look at what the Republican Party is doing. Well, I don't think that the Republican Party is doing that. There are people who consider themselves conservative who may not even be Republican who are promoting these things, but across the board, even in OAN or Newsmax or Fox News, they're not out there promoting violence. And I just think it's very unfair to say that any of these conservative outlets, as well as liberal outlets, are promoting violence overall across the board. Neither.
There's been a lot of
you still have Republicans calling January 6th a tourist event. You had absolutely no Democrats last summer not excoriating those who became violent during the Black Lives Matter protests. It is not the same.
Yeah, but what Democrats were doing last year, they were actually posting bail of people who actually went and rioted, looted, and burned down cities. So if you want to do a comparison, we can actually start there.
I think there was, I would say I think there was downplaying of how much destruction of property and violence was going on during the summer protests. With mainstream media figures, standing in front of the fires saying it's mostly peaceful, just compared to the January 6th, because you can also say that about January 6th. It was mostly peaceful. 95% of the people there were doing a legitimate First Amendment protest, and then 5% of the people went insane and did horrible, abominable things for which they have been arrested and should all be prosecuted. And then the media is like the same mainstream media that were like looking at the fires and saying, it's mostly peaceful about the summer protests, are like on day 8,000 of their coverage of the January 6th riots.
And it's super dangerous, and I think an off base to call that domestic terrorism. Rioting, looting, those are words that can fit.
I wouldn't call anything domestic terrorism. Right. I would retire the entire term to save all our civil liberties. But anyway, Malik and Jennifer, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brad.
And we'll have more Rising after this. Please stick around.